My name's Bethan and I'm going to share with you my story growing up on the children's ward. Before I jump into the video, I just want to say that I really want to give an honest account of my experience, which includes the good and the bad, but ultimately I know that I'm so privileged to have the care I do, and I'm beyond grateful to everyone that's been involved in that care over the last 20 years because I quite literally owe them my life. So I have cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is genetic, meaning you're born with it, and it affects around 10,400 people in the UK. 1 in 25 of us carry the gene, and usually we don't even know it. When both parents carry the gene, they have a 1 in 4 chance of having a child with CF. Obviously these are just statistics, but that's actually how it happened in my family. My mum and dad had 4 children. Both my brothers carry the gene, my sister doesn't, and I have CF. There's currently no cure for CF, although they're really working on it at the moment. And the life expectancy for someone with it is around 40 years old, although half of those with CF don't make it to the age of 28. CF causes your body to produce too much thick, sticky mucus, which causes various problems in various organs. The main problem is with the lungs. All the thick, sticky mucus in our lungs is difficult to shift, which creates an ideal breeding ground for bugs and bacteria, so we get frequent chest infections. These chest infections can be really damaging for our lungs and can result in irreversible damage and loss of lung function, which brings me to the whole point of the video, which is why I go into hospital and what that was like. My trips to Rose Ward consisted of 2-week admissions for IV antibiotics. IV stands for intravenous, which means it goes directly into your veins. When I was younger, that would be delivered through something like a cannula, which goes in your hand or arm, a long line. But as your veins get used more often, they get scarred, and that's why I had my port placed. So now the medicine goes into there. CF is a progressive illness, meaning it gets worse as you get older. So my admissions progressed from roughly once a year when I was about 8 to around every 3 months by the time I was 13. My very first admission to Rose Ward was May 2007, so I was 8. I don't really have many pictures of that time, just because smartphones weren't a thing, but I'll try and set the scene for you. I just made my Holy Communion because I grew up Catholic, and I love gymnastics. Other than the obvious issue of having CF, I was pretty healthy. My parents had recently gotten a divorce, so my older 2 siblings were with my dad, while myself and my brother were with my mum. So even though they did their absolute best to be with me as much as possible, they were both effectively single parents now, so I was often alone. My first night is really vivid in my memory. I was in Oasis. I think it's called Oasis. I'm impressed with myself if that's right. Anyway, it's a 5-bed bay and I was the only person in there. And later in life, I came to really appreciate that bay because it was always empty, and I would go and dance and mess around, but at the time it was really scary. I had a really nice nurse called Neil, and it was about 9 o'clock. I remember I couldn't sleep and I was really upset and nervous, and he came and said, "Oh well, it's pretty early, why don't I introduce you to some friends?" And this was before the CF segregation rule, which I'll get into later. But he introduced me to some friends, and they were all quite a bit older than me, so it's really nice of them to take on an 8-year-old. But basically, from that point on, it was no longer a hospital, it was a summer camp. I loved it. So on day 14 of my admission, I did my lung function test, and the results weren't very good. So the doctor said to me, "Oh, I'm really sorry, I don't think you're going to be able to go home quite yet." My parents told me that I wasn't going home and they were really disappointed. But the thing about lung function tests is that they all happen at the same day. Everyone has them pretty much at the same time. The person goes from room to room. So anyway, myself and my friend ran up to each other and she excitedly said, "I'm staying." And I automatically went, "I have to stay." And she said, "Don't you want to stay?" And it was a really weird, confusing moment, and it was the start of a long and confusing time where I realised that how I perceived my health and how I felt about my health conflicted with how I was supposed to see my health and how I was supposed to feel, because even as an 8-year-old I was able to read the reactions of the people around me. I also got so many cards and presents that time, get well soon, I'm sorry, loads of gifts for being in the hospital, which all added to this feeling that I was supposed to be unhappy where I was. It was a confusing time. I will just mention now that I went on to have many more challenges in the hospital and growing up with CF, but that's how 8-year-old me felt about the hospital anyway. Over the next few years I was admitted once or twice a year, and on these occasions I went to my local hospital. I won't really get into it just because I don't have much to say other than I absolutely hated it. I know my parents prefer me being local, but other than that, for me, it just wasn't worth it. This is in no way the fault of the staff there, and on one occasion I was taken out to a reptile house, which I think I have pictures of. But I think really the problem was that they just weren't used to long-term patients. Any other children there were there for minor surgeries, overnight observations, 1 or 2 days at a time. I feel like the camera's slipping. Sorry about that. So that meant that I was the only child ever in the schoolroom or the playroom, and it was just so lonely. The Brompton, on the other hand, are used to treating patients who are there for weeks or even months at a time. Because of that, the staff in the school, playroom, youth club, and in recent years vocal beats have really made a hospital feel like a home. The more time I spent in the hospital, the more it became just a regular part of everyday life. If you put your life on hold every time you went in, you would miss out on a lot of living. So I had to learn that life happens everywhere. My team at the hospital knew that too, so they were absolutely amazing at accommodating anything I had to do, whether that was gymnastics competitions or shows, school events, parties, birthdays. All of these pictures were taken whilst I was an inpatient at the hospital. It just meant that I would come and go from there instead of home.
Hi, birthday girl.
Hi.
That's what I know. I got my birthday girl in the picture.
Yeah.
When I was 13, I had my Portacath placed, like I mentioned earlier.
Good morning, Beth. No, I said that. Good morning.
Good morning.
Here we are, Thursday, November the 14th, 2012. Beth, you ready to go down to have a Portacath put in, which is going to eliminate what she's got on her hand now, which is called a line.
Cannula.
A cannula. She's looking forward to it, aren't you, love?
Yeah.
So it's going to make life a lot easier as far as IVs are concerned.
Bye. It's a device that's placed under the skin and allows for easy IV access. If you want to learn more about Portacath placement, I'll link a video down below. It was made by an amazing play specialist called Sarah while I was in. So I'm in it along with a bunch of other CF patients who are at various stages of having their ports. I still have my port, as you can see, and it's working great, and it was the best decision ever. So yeah, definitely check out the video if you're thinking about getting one or you're just interested in it. For those of you watching who aren't familiar with hospital life, or maybe are not familiar with CF hospital life specifically, hospitals aren't the relaxing experience I think some people think they are. People always talk about boredom and they bring you magazines and things because they think you must be so bored, and that was never the case. My days were jam-packed, just with treatments and physio sessions and school and random scans and exercise, which by the way was a highlight of my day every day. Me and Alice, shout out if you're watching, would do all sorts of things, really whatever I fancied, We would play games, badminton in the corridors, we could leave the hospital, go on a run, play Just Dance on the Wii. When I was more focused on my gymnastics, we would do training specific to that. So yeah, it was just good fun. So as I just said, growing up in a children's ward means school. And let me tell you, I was not a fan. Because for much of my life, I believed that hospital equaled holiday. Who makes a sick kid go to school? That's not okay. The staff at the hospital obviously never stopped trying, and I'm really grateful. They were amazing, they still are amazing. And thanks to my serious bunking, by the time I got to GCSEs, I realised I was in big trouble. I didn't know what I was going to do, and they really supported me to bring it back. I actually ended up taking all my GCSEs in the hospital, or maybe all but one of them, as well as my A-levels, and now I'm at university. So yeah, they're the best. Can't thank them enough. Taking your exams in the hospital also isn't the sob story I think everyone thinks it would be. You get one-on-one support. You can rock up to your exam in your pajamas. You don't have to stand outside the exam hall with 100 other stressed teenagers discussing what they did and didn't revise, and then afterwards discussing their marks. It was fine, it was good. 2014 was a big year for me with my health. I was in more that summer than I had been in my entire life up to that point. And, obviously I was navigating the regular teenage trauma of friendships and GCSEs and I don't know, all that weird stuff. Often the nurses were like parents. They were comforting, supportive, kind, and they were always there for a chat when I needed them, day or night. That also meant that sometimes they had to discipline us, which I obviously didn't appreciate at the time. The main issue for me came from the CF segregation rule. I am not usually a rule breaker, but I wasn't good with this one, and I honestly don't recommend it. Don't do it, kids. It's not cool. But at the time, it just came from a place of loneliness and wanting to connect with someone my own age who understood what I was going through. So yeah, I hated getting in trouble about that because every time I did, I felt such immense shame and guilt, and I hated the thought that I had hurt anyone. I remember one time being talked to, and it was very much things like that it was disrespectful and it was inhibiting the nurses from doing their jobs and things like that. I felt awful. I think there's also this weird perception that sick kids are automatically angels, when really we're no different to anyone else. Don't get me wrong, I try to be the best version of myself at all times, but you're a teenager, you have your bad days. When you lose your temper with a parent, it's upsetting. When you lose your temper with a nurse, it's mortifying. For one, they have to look after you for maybe the rest of the day or the rest of the week, and they don't have to love you unconditionally. And two, it's almost certain that everyone will know about it within a few hours. It might even be handed over that Bethan's in a bad mood. Now, transitioning from the kids to the adult services is a big deal for someone with a chronic illness. Love it or hate it, you become familiar with your bizarre hospital family, and the thought of having to start all over again can be really scary. Transition for CF patients at the Brompton happens between the ages of 16 and 17. I actually turned 17 on Rose Ward, and I'll insert some pictures here. The play team threw me a Disney themed party, which was awesome, and they bought me a beautiful Pandora bracelet to remember them by. It had a rose charm on it, because it's Rose Ward. It was obviously going to be strange, but I was quite excited at the prospect of having a fresh start. I moved to the adult services shortly after that, and was admitted a few months after. My first admission was a real shock to the system. I remember feeling like everyone was really nice and I was very well cared. Oh, wait, why can't I speak? I was very well cared for, but it was very isolating. On Rose Ward, there was always someone to talk to day or night. I would sit in the playroom or the schoolroom or the youth club, or if all those were closed, I would just sit at the nurse's station or have a takeaway in the corridor. And suddenly all of that was gone. I was just completely alone. Of course, the regular medical staff came in, but I knew that now that I was an adult, I was expected to act mature, so there was no way I was going to be hanging out with them at the nurse's station anymore. Interestingly, one of the only things that was consistent was the physios. I knew a lot of the physios from Rose Ward because they worked weekends on Rose Ward, and that was such a saving grace. It seems like a little thing because it's just one group of staff, but I really think that without them, the transition would have felt a lot more overwhelming. Which brings me to the final part of the story. If you've made it this far, thanks for sticking around. But this December just gone, I was on the adult ward Fowlis, having one of the most depressing days. It was my 20th birthday, and I had just been crying, actually, when Heather from Vocal Beats knocked on my door and popped her head in. I was like, fancy a sing-song? And my automatic reaction was like, oh dear, no, I'm a mess. She's gonna know I've been crying. Bad timing, you know, really bad timing. But I can't say no, I feel awkward. So I'm like, okay, you know? And it actually ended up being so wonderful. Heather and I sang, and we did the different singing techniques, and then my parents joined in, and it was so weird and awesome, you know, and it totally turned my day around. It just lifted my spirits. By the time Heather left, I was definitely not in a crying mood anymore. I decided that I was gonna go out for a birthday meal, and I got myself ready and we left, and it was awesome. That brings me to the end of this little story. Please like if you liked the video, share it with anyone who would be interested, and subscribe. I really did just scratch the surface of what it's like to grow up with CF, so if there's anything I mentioned that you'd be interested in hearing more about, be sure to comment down below. Okay, that's all for today. Thanks for watching. Bye.